Hey, wonderful to see you.
Yeah, Jew. Yeah, technology, wonderful.
Yes, no, we should do this more often anyway. I mean,
Yeah, I know it's crazy. How are you getting on? You seem to be managing to keep alive and well and communicating with people. Are you
I'm doing
surviving
my
okay?
best, surviving
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I found it very tough. I found it very hard. I've I found I get less and less interested in kind of maintaining relationships. It's
Hmm.
I know it's important, but it's kind of the effort just seems so much. And I've found, even within my family, I haven't been calling them and things like that. It's just sort of
Hmm.
letting things drift apart. I don't know whether that's a symptom of lockdown or what it is, but it's quite noticeable, really. The isolation tends to increase, not decrease. I keep quite
Yeah,
busy, but I somehow don't get that done.
I understand. I mean, I think it's a very complex situation where we really are not really we really don't understand the extent
Yeah,
of what is happening or what happened, right? So it's
yeah, it is.
yeah, and just like the psychological effects of it. Like human beings are made, are social animals. So, uh, and
Yeah,
I don't know how let's say how careful you were, like, or how I think, I've said this before to some in some of these conversations, that I think, that one really needs to kind of like balance a reason and fear and the risk. It's something where each one of us has to find his or her own way of doing that, so that one can
yeah,
stay healthy, mentally healthy, I mean,
yeah.
also, right?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, I was very nervous because because of my age. So I was very nervous at the beginning. When Jamie has been quite nervous about it all as well. So we've been very careful
Hmm.
all the
Hmm.
way through.
Have you been
Um,
seeing your kids?
I mean, we hadn't seen. My birthday the other day, we got together with our daughter and son, James and Lisa,
Mhm.
and it was the first time we've been together with them since Christmas 2019.
Oh,
That was just a month ago, less than a month ago. So that that there really was a kind of schism. I mean, we met with them outside, and then Lisa had stayed in Germany. Actually, she came back. She stayed for a while with us. So we did do some. We did live together at one point with her, but
mhm.
we've all been, I think, fairly careful. And but it comes at a price. You know, Isolation comes at a price.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I've it's kind of interesting because I think there are like kind of like different phases of, that I went through.
Yeah,
And like I've been like very much a guy who enjoys isolation anyway.
yeah,
Um, but like these few moments where I actually made contact with the outside world, right? They are missing, and I feel that as well.
yes,
It's
yeah,
but like there's interesting thing is, like Uma is my daughter is now one
yes,
and a half years old, and I
yeah,
spent you know all this time with her, which was amazing and is
yeah,
amazing. And so I don't see why I should be complaining. Like the other aspect is just the reality of my profession,
yeah,
of making music in public, and getting paid for it,
yes,
and like like these like the money that I got from the German state, I actually returned it to them today, because they sent me an email, actually, which was saying, like, if you need to kind of like see how much expenses you actually had, and
yes,
and then like return all the rest of the money. And I did that. And the way that I've been leading my life, I didn't have many expenses anyway.
Yes.
So
Yes.
in a way, it's been kind of like a really, really awkward situation. But anyway, and like I started doing, I started to teach more. Like for me, it was just going back to an older life. The life before I was touring, and I've been coping well with that, I think. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's. My idea is maybe let's just talk about something that excites us, something positive and or something interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
It was just I was just thinking before the conversation that I have seen you with a mask even before COVID. When we were in La Paz, and
All
you
right.
had the.
Oh dear. I
Oh,
kind of, I kind of had such actually really special memories of Bolivia that it's, although it was hard work at the time, it's kind of, it's just stayed in my memory as a fantastic place.
it was.
And it's apparently some of the people in Bolivia don't rate octaves as being the same thing. Some of the indigenous people, I didn't know about this, but I read it in a New Scientist magazine about a month ago. I was quite interested in that. I think it's because they don't. I think the music they play naturally is just all melodic, so they don't have anything harmonic where they might kind of clue into that, I guess. But they don't actually recognise that relationship. They don't recognise it as anything other than a different note. It's another different note.
That's
Quite
that's
interesting.
that's incredible, because that is one of the things that I have been preaching a little bit and also teaching to my
Oh, what's
students,
that?
that the
The
system.
universality of the octave or something.
Yeah, that the octave, at least you can build a system. Even though you hear the octave as an octave, you can build a system that repeats at a different interval. And
Yes.
actually, that's what from I believe that the whole system of music that we have in the West is based
You've frozen on me.
on the fifth, of the interval of the fifth, where the fifth is the repeating. It's not the octave, it's the fifth that is filled with notes, and then the fifth repeats, and we get 12 fifths until we return back to the beginning. And so that's why it's interesting to hear that there is a people that doesn't hear the octave as an octave, and
Yeah.
makes total sense to me.
Or maybe they do work on that on a fifth transposition or something. Maybe they do move up to a fifth and do the same thing.
Could be.
I mean, it's yeah. Wasn't the Lydian chromatic concept? Did you ever read that book?
Yeah.
I think that was based on the notion that the natural scale was actually two identical. No, what was that actually based on? But it da 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 da. Well, they are two identical tetrachords anyway, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think
Can't remember now.
I think in terms of pentachords a lot. So
Yeah.
groups of 5 notes, and that has been kind of like really eye-opening to me. And
Tell me about that. I don't know anything about that. So what do you do?
so basically, I look at the scale to be 5 notes within the space of a fifth, right? So that your Ionian scale, and I'm only using the term Ionian because it's something that we understand.
Yeah.
Would be better to have my own words for that. But Ionian pentachord would be like in C would be C, D, E, F, G, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have the Lydian pentachord, C, D, E, F sharp, G.
F sharp, yeah.
Yeah. Or you have the Dorian / Aeolian, C, D, E flat, F, G, right? And then the Phrygian, and then you have the Locrian.
Yeah.
So it's only 5. There's only 5 pentachords, 5 notes. And then I built everything. I built all the diatonic scales from, by stacking.
Why? We haven't had. What about C? What about C, D flat, E?
Yeah, doesn't. Yeah,
you regard that as a mode of one of these pentachords?
No, that wouldn't be a mode of it. No, because like my system is.
Are you limited to tones and semitones?
Yeah, exactly. It's limiting it to the diatonic rules, let's say.
Right. Yeah.
And then obviously you can derive any other combination from the diatonic pentachord, as I call it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been incredible because it just allows people to very quickly learn scales and understand the construction of scales, because you basically, like I said, you disregard the octave and you stack 2 pentachords. So like you have C to G, which is the Ionian pentachord, then you have from A to E, which is the Aeolian pentachord.
Yes.
And then you would have from F to C, which is the Lydian pentachord.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because I saw a couple of videos about Alan Holdsworth recently, and then I realized like he was doing something like that as well, because like he was covering those 8 frets also with his left hand, and basically was stacking these triad structures within a pentachord, like diatonically, and I guess on violin that's something that could be like quite easy, right? What's kind of like the usual range you use within the hand?
What, across one string?
One string, yes.
Well, it's a fourth basically.
Okay.
Fourth, so you sort of from first to fourth finger is, it's a fourth. But then if you're using the open strings, then you get a fifth because you get the open string in as well. And the span is an octave when you go from one string to the next string.
Yes.
I mean, with my hand, it's struggle. I've got a small hand, and I struggle with playing some of the things that really good violinists can play, because they do stretch further than that. You extend up higher than that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's probably more suited. Thinking in that way is probably more suited to a fretted instrument than an unfretted instrument. So mine's fretted up to a point. So I can think that way up to a point, and then it's suddenly from halfway down the instrument becomes freestyle, which is a bit different. But it's quite an interesting. Improvisational compositional device, isn't it? Your pentachord. Yeah.
You see, that's like, I mean, so with my teaching, like everything kind of like interlocks, right? So, and it's basically this ongoing narrative, or this kind of like the storytelling, and I use the storytelling aspect in order to pass on information, let's say, or could say to teach, right? So everything starts from the idea of like that, where we use the circle of fifth, but we look at the circle of fifth as the basic material to build our scales, right? So like if you start at any point in the circle of fifth and you take 5 notes, you get a pentatonic scale, right? And if you take another 2, you get the diatonic scale. And then what people realize is that then the first note of that and the last note, that's the tritone relationship. So if you take the tritone out of that, then you get the pentatonic scale. And then people start understanding, okay, if you add tritone relationship to a pentatonic scale, you get a diatonic scale, etc. So it's like a narrative that I kind of like, almost like a meme, I put that into the brains of the students, so they start thinking in terms of the circle of fifth and how scales are made of that, and then how you also can transpose around the circle of fifth. And then
what's the storytelling thing before you?
Well, I basically start with like a monk in Cologne, and like where the church that will become the cathedral, right? And like these monks, and they they start singing tunes, and then they like after singing they always get drunk, and then they realize, okay, I found this, we sang this amazing song tonight, and I really would like to sing it again tomorrow, but I know that if I'm going to drink, I'm not going to remember it. And they start, like, someone decided, okay, let's try to find a way to write it down. And okay, so let's say A is the drone, right, and B, C, D, and so this is sort of like how I start the story. And then it's not about the story being true or anything of that being true. It's about getting people into this mood of dreaming up and of asking themselves what if, right? And then like then I tell the story that, okay, so if you listen to sounds in nature, right, and a string, or you hit a stone, with if you listen closely, you hear that a lot. Most of the times, if it's not noise, you hear the fifth interval, right? So now that if we just
Well,
consider, okay,
that's news to me. Oh, you're talking about the harmonic.
the harmonic.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Like the harmonic, the fifth, which is like the first harmonic that's not the root. Yeah. So, and then I said, okay, so what happens to it? Just imagine yourself sitting, at a really beautiful, huge grand piano, and you start playing. You play a C, right? You play a C with the pinky of your left hand, and you let it ring, and you pay close attention. You hear the overtones, and you pay attention, and you hear the fifth, right? So now you decide you want to emphasize the fifth, right? You hear it, you find the fifth, you find that note, find that key that is called C now. You play that C, and what happens is you emphasize the fifth. And since you're playing the C now, you're also hearing the fifth of that note, of the C. So you start hearing the G. And this is kind of like where then you basically create the circle of fifth. And then you realize,
but
okay,
the circle of fifth doesn't work with perfect fifths, does it?
well, it doesn't, but that's kind of like the point I was trying to make. It doesn't have to
Oh, is
be.
it?
It doesn't have to. Well, no, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a truth. It's just kind of like, why do we end up with a system of equal temperament and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like I said. It's just sort of like a device to get people into this understanding that all 12 notes are potentially equal. Like there's no note that is wrong. It's just that we have different relationships, and they have different sounds, and we can use them, and we can, that's sort of like the idea. And so this initial story
Froze off again, but
okay. So this initial story is just so that people kind of like have an open mind and sort of like understand that they can kind of combine any of the 12 pitches and then simply listen.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's working, and then at some point we get to music analysis and look at Debussy and
You can combine any
Bach.
notes. You can combine any notes anyway, can't you? I mean, you don't need a system.
No, exactly.
You
Exactly.
just need to feel free.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And free to move.
Yes. But like one of the main concerns that people have is to play the right note, right? And what they mean is to kind of like stick to whatever system there is, like play chord tones, or and a lot of music education is built on those ideas rather on the idea to come from the other side, where you have all the notes available and then you simply use them to find out what they sound like.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the end game of your storytelling then?
to get people to be,
in terms of education, what's the end game?
well, just it depends on what the student wants, really. Some want to learn to play an instrument, some want to learn to improvise, some want to learn more about composition.
Yes.
But mostly it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. But most people have a very fixed idea, don't they, of what they want to be like? Like most people probably have no doubt in their head about what they want to sound like, or who they want to sound like, or the sort of music that they want to play. I mean, I think you have a more, you have a kind of open view of what you play, do you not? I mean, basically you explore, you go for it, and like everybody else, sometimes you fall over a bit and you pick yourself up, try something different, but it's it's continually exploring, because you're at the cutting edge of what's being done. But for
Mm.
most people, that isn't the case, is it?
Yeah.
Most people that I meet who want to learn about music have a fairly clear idea about the sort of music they want to end up playing.
Yes, and it's important, and this is why, like, the way that I address that is that I say, okay, what would, if you were my student, I would say, okay, David, we need to find out what you would do. Like, so if we have like
Yeah,
an exercise, a compositional exercise, you'd say, okay, what would David do?
yeah,
Like, as simple as, say, like, you have like two chords, and I would ask you, okay, what's the third chord? And then
yeah,
you can start analyzing. Okay, I decided to have a D major after C major and A minor, for example.
yeah,
And then the question is, okay, so now David, analyze what that means. Like, okay, so you went from the, whatever, you would kind of like find a way to describe that, and then that's something that David does, and then you sort of take a mental note of that. So that is something that David does, and you put it in your toolbox, basically, right? And
right,
so on the way of like exploration of what David does, kind of create this toolbox, and you can always access the things that David does, which
mm,
that I find that very important, because that means like you're staying with yourself. You're not kind of like giving your creative impulses up for somebody else's, right?
yes,
But as you become aware of how you do things, you sort of also create branches in your decision tree, and
yeah,
because you realize, like, oh, normally I would go a half step down here, but now that I know that I would go a half step down here, what if I go up a half step? And that's
yeah,
sort of like this what if again that I kind of
mm, mm,
like to implant in composers' minds, because
yeah.
that's sort of like uh, where the inspiration and the motivation then comes from, like asking the question, what if?
I like the idea of toolboxes. I mean, I've used that myself in a. Um, I like doing it as a way of looking at, of trying to boil a piece down to its core
Mhm.
constituents. Sometimes I go the other way. There seems to be something that's finished, but actually I want to do a different version of it, or think about it a different way. And the toolbox idea, I think, is really good, because it forces you to say, well, actually, what are the key things here? Now, what's important about this? What's the key to this? What's the core of this? What actually makes this, feel like it's expressing what it is I want to express? And it can be a rhythm, it can be note choices, it can be textures, timbres, anything at all. And if you just find those, say, well, is this the essential one? I like the idea of putting them in a tool chest, called David's tool chest. For people, I mean, so presumably you have a Coltrane tool chest, and Miles Davis and all the rest of it, and Beethoven, and I think that's a really really nice idea, and I haven't heard that before. I think that's nice. I've thought about it with myself as a tool chest, but I haven't heard that talked about in that way before. I think that's a good way of thinking, and also it doesn't universalize the knowledge into a kind of paradigm that's that everything's got to be like. If what you're saying is this belongs over here, or it lives here. This is part of this toolkit, so you can take from it if you want, or whatever. Yeah, no, I think
Yeah,
that's a nice idea.
and
Because I
it.
mean, the problem is trying to make a sense of such a diverse musical world, isn't it? From from our perspective as kind of creators um, within this world, which is really in a very short time we've learned that we've listened to each other in a way that we never had before. We certainly weren't doing it 100 years ago, and it's some music seems forever inaccessible to me because I don't have the cultural background. I didn't, but I can pick up elements of it. So it is all a mystery, really. It's all too much. But I think the idea of looking at toolboxes and seeing what comes there is really good. It's really
Yeah.
useful.
You know, there's sort of like this romanticized version also of the musician or the composer where you just have ideas, right? Like, so it's
Yes,
like you'd have an idea, and or I have an idea here, I have an idea there,
yes,
but I don't think that would even lead to necessarily good art or a great
no,
composition, because the toolbox metaphor, let's say, is much more powerful, because like here's what I do, and obviously it's like it's many different things. It's not just one thing, many different things. So if I now write the A section of my piece of music, I don't need to have an idea that's externalized. I don't have to have a second idea to write the B section, but I
yes,
can kind of like see, okay, these are the parts of what I do that I've used in my
yeah,
A section. And then you can either say, okay, let me just use a permutation of what I use in the A section to create the B section. Or you can decide, okay, I want to use, the other tools that are in the toolbox that I have not used yet, and that will become a B section. You have like a freedom to kind of like stay within the or to create everything from that first initial idea, and you don't have to be get inspired all the time, and
yes,
it sort of helps people with writer's block also.
yeah, mm, yeah. I think that I mean, what interests you most? Is it the kind of initial ideas, or is it that working through and the seeing what you can do with something? Is it the development, or is it the kind of joy of the moment when you suddenly get a good idea? Which bits do you like?
I guess I like both.
Yeah,
It's in a way, I think it's a little bit like the joy of solving a puzzle that I probably,
right.
yeah, I
Yes.
that's what I enjoy most. And
I'll
and
just show you this. So I wanted to find it while I was
yeah,
thinking about it. This was toolkit, top right hand, top corner here. So this is Shades of Starless. I was just working out how
ah,
how I might, get to. This wasn't the original. I did this after the event, but I was trying to think, how would I put this across if I wanted to stick something in somebody's hand and say we're going to do Shades of Starless. What are the key elements of it? And I called that a toolkit then, just
there
quite
you go,
interesting
there you
to
go. Yes,
come
exactly.
to it.
Yeah, and you see, like when we improvise together, I think
Yeah,
what sort of happens is that as you improvise together, and you have like we played close to 20 shows together on that tour, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Um, like what happens is that basically the musicians create the toolbox as you play, right?
Yes, right.
And yeah, that is maybe the most joyful part of music making for me. if
Yes, yeah,
if if collectively um, is a sound or an approach, and especially if it's as free as the one that we developed,
yeah.
is that is really like the most joyful for
Mm.
me.
Oh, it is absolutely. I mean, I guess you said, well, we're social animals at the
Hmm.
beginning, and I think that um, the level of social connection that you get through music and playing music together in that free and creative way is unsurpassable, really, and very
Hmm.
different from anything else. Maybe sports are a bit like that, working in a team, but that always has a kind of a goal beyond, whereas the within the music itself is the goal when you're making music with other people. And I still find it, my memories of a lot of the work we were doing on stage were that we really did find to get ourselves into a very special spiritual kind of place, a place that was away from, but completely inside the people that were in the room, and it's not just talking about musicians, of course. I'm talking about the audience, who are all part of making that very special event at that time.
Yes.
Um, I think one of the things that that I think did come up when we were doing that, which I also remember from Crimson when we were improvising, was that when you're going down a road again, when you're coming to the same a similar road, where do you go? Do you go with what worked last time, or do you go somewhere else? And that's also one of the very interesting parts, because what was first of all, an unconscious or a kind of collective outcome, that we turned left here before when we came down this road, then it starts to become a conscious decision. And then is it your decision, or is somebody else going to make the decision for you? And are you going to go down that way or not? And it's, I really like all of that because it just shows, how you are in a different place. It's like traveling on a different planet that's somehow within this planet, but not there. And it has its own rules of steering and geography and its own territory. I think it's a fantastic experience because the palette is also playing with you and the others. The palette is kind of always open, with Tony and Pat. That it's kind of it's never restricted, and that's a fantastic place to be.
And even if it's restricted, then there is freedom within the restrictions, and like Shades of Starless being a good example, right? So like we set the mood and it was always C minor, as far as I remember, right? And that's sort of that's a given, okay? But then within that, I don't think I ever played the same combination of notes twice on the whole tour, and I think that's absolutely it's absolutely fine. But even within the completely written pieces, I feel there's a certain level of freedom, and even if it just comes down to timing things, right? Like where you can be a little more loose or a little bit ahead, and this, as you say, the interaction with the audience, the interaction between the musicians, and just this organism that is kind of like, it's a little bit like dancing, right? But coming back to it, I really, really enjoyed the fact that when we played together, like the free improvisations, there were no restrictions harmonically whatsoever. But but even though it always worked. I think it's just because we assumed that anything goes, and that's why it all sounded good.
It's a funny mixture of kind of. But you've got to have confidence, haven't you, to do it? So you've got to have confidence that it is going to work. If fear comes in, then it's all over, really. So, you kind of almost define everything you're playing as working. It has to work. So, if I play a note and it doesn't happen to be anything like the note you're playing, that's it's got to be fine because. There's no question of it. We can't admit to it not being fine. So we have to find a way to make it work. And I think one of the wonderful things about music is it's kind of, it's time retrospective. So you can play something that sounds awful at this point, but if you repeat it, 4.5 seconds later, this suddenly takes on a new meaning, which it didn't have when you first played it. You've given this meaning. You've moved backwards in time. It's a very clever thing like that. I don't know if we're learning something about the universe by playing music or not. Maybe we are.
Let's hope so. but it is that act or that idea of kind of problem solving, right? Like in a way, and I don't mean that in a stressful way, right? It's just the joy of playing with a puzzle, and as you say, like, so maybe one solution is to just repeat an action that you just did, right? And I'm so I have to say, I think I'm a little bit addicted to creating music like that.
Yeah. Well, it is very addictive, um, but it's difficult to get the opportunity to do it, I think. I mean, but you've got to get the right people lined up for a start, and then you know, all interested in it, and you've got to get an audience is willing to put up with it as well, because they've got to share in the belief as well, haven't they? You know, if they doubt what's going on, you know, it's going to. I mean, it's one of the one of the problems I think that Crimson had with improvising was that the you know, audience, some of the audience needed to be convinced at the time. So they were, because the audience wasn't completely believing in what we were doing, you know, that threw doubt into, you know, our minds, I think, to some extent. I think we tended to make, when we came to that turning in the street where we'd gone left last time, if that worked last time, we tended to keep doing that rather than turn right and see what was around that corner, because
Yeah.
you know, the audience might, it might be something the audience didn't like. So I think there's a, you know, an element of conditioning that can happen. So the audience is really critical, I think, to stuff like that.
But then this element of conditioning leads to a sound also, right? So to an identity,
Yes.
and that is interesting that you mentioned Crimson here, because when I first played with you, and I think I told you, we on that first Japanese short tour we did in Japan, when and I had the idea to put a keyboard on stage because I really wanted you to have access to
Yeah,
some
no, nobody
mellotones.
else had done that. I'd kind of given up on the keyboard, you know,
I think
20 years before, I think.
it was so incredible. So like the first time you like touched the keyboard, you know, it was like, oh, that's the sound, you know, that is that Crimson improv sound from
You're
74,
the only
73.
person who's ever asked me to play the keyboard. So it's
Really?
quite, yeah. Most people just say, no, get him off it.
Yeah,
Don't
but
let him play the keyboard.
but interesting because I never thought about what it must have been like back then improvising live with Crimson, what the response of the audience might have been, and there was quite a lot of improv in the shows, right?
Yeah, there was. Yeah. You know, I mean, it was always carefully kind of placed between safe posts, you know, of tunes or, you know, heavy riffs or something that, you know, pieces with heavy riffs, things we knew would work anyway, you know,
Hmm.
for the audience. But yeah, I think over time I think particularly, you know, I mean, I think it was different in Europe. You know, German, Dutch, French audiences were kind of were listening and more kind of focused in what was actually going on stage.
Hmm.
Whereas already in America, you know, audiences are much more engaged in their kind of their friends on stage. You know,
Hmm.
these are my team. This is part of my, you know, identity, and they were they kind of already come up with an identity for this team, I think, before we had,
Hmm.
and I think that was part of the kind of closing down of the possibilities for the band on stage, which made it more and more difficult to do, you know, do dangerous and interesting and delicate things.
Okay, so there you go. So maybe the fact that I'm can be quite ignorant of the audience has been a good thing because
Oh yeah,
with Stickman certainly in the US, like we you know we just do whatever we want,
yeah. Well, that's
and
great. Yeah, I'll try and adopt that attitude, I think.
but like
I think
in South America, people were really into the improvs. I found.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, it was just a great experience all round. I mean, they just seemed to be very interested in, you know, just seeing what we were doing. You know, they wanted to know what we were doing and wanted to be part
Mhm.
of it. You know, I thought that was happening everywhere we went. One of the things that has always been very easy for me playing with Stickman is the getting into the right state of mind to play. It's kind of it's just full, because everything sounds so good all the time. I can start, I don't have to play. I can just walk off stage and all the rest of it. But and the thing will just always sound good. So it's partly that, but I think it's the people as well. Make me feel safe, make me feel that I can be understood. So it's like walking into a kind of familiar living room in a way, to walk on stage with Stickman. And I've been during the lockdown, particularly, I've been kind of looking for that in trying to think about creating pieces or improvisations now on my own. And that's getting into that state is really hard work on your own. I mean, composers have always managed to do that, but I've just found I keep getting caught up in you're talking about the kind of process of generating material that to complete pieces. I kind of get caught up in that, and mixing and finishing off stuff that I've started. But actually, the thing that really excites me is that moment of insight or creation, or it's when you get an emotional connection with an idea or a place or a feeling, and it's really strong enough to make you want to write something about it. And I've really been missing that. And then a couple of times I've had it start to come back now, and it's really nice. It's been really good. And it was just things like my mother, who died in 2015, suddenly remembering her, and I kind of haven't properly kind of grieved for that, her dying. I probably haven't really kind of thought through that properly, and suddenly I get a feeling back about that and want to write a piece. And I suddenly found I was writing little kind of snapshots of all my family as I was growing up. I started to write these little pieces, and because they meant something to me suddenly. These are things I kind of had probably just put out of my mind because I didn't want to feel sad, or I didn't want to have to deal with it. And then suddenly they were coming back as things I could connect with musically as well. And it's I can't plan for these things, but I'm finding it really nice now that I'm recognizing that is a key element of creating music that's going to have a chance of meaning something to somebody else. If it doesn't mean something to me in the first place, it's never going to mean anything to somebody else. So it's got to be something. The core of it has got to be something that affects me in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I've been wondering if what you just said is really true, because I think that sometimes music has been made for completely different reasons than music, right? And still the music speaks to people. Yes. And so music is greater. Music is greater than any human intention, I think.
No, I've come to that conclusion as well, actually.
Yes.
No, I agree. Music's more powerful than the people that make it.
Yes, definitely.
I've just finished now an album with my band, which is a puzzling mixture of pieces, and I've been trying to work out what the meaning of it all is through it, and that in the end that was the only conclusion I came to, because originally it was supposed to be about the people in the band, but actually it ended up being about the music, because the music somehow is stronger than the constituents, than the people who make it, and the music, yes, does work more than that. I'm not sure if that contradicts what I was saying. You were saying that music that's made for a different purpose still works. Yes. So music that's made give me an example. What are you thinking of?
Well, to make you money, or to make you feel better, or to find a partner, or like all sorts of just very basic human needs can be tied to like the tools that you use to get it, and music can be one of those tools. Yes. And I think that when people make music like that comes from a different motivation rather than just purely the musical motivation, let's say, that music can just speak to other human beings just like music that was made for musical reasons.
Yes, yes. I think you're right. I think you kind of once you put music in motion, it works. It
Yeah,
kind of happens.
yeah.
It does its thing. It does its job.
Like I'm
Um,
saying that we
yeah,
don't need a pure intention, let's say,
mm,
necessarily. I mean,
mm,
like for myself, I would say yes, right? Like for me, it's important.
yeah,
Yeah, but I don't think that it's something that can be generalized.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I sometimes I work most before I had worked mostly for music as starting points. Sounds I liked or motifs or whatever. But I found this more recent experience of actually having a kind of emotional trigger. It goes back to an earlier way I used to try and create music, which was using emotional recall as a kind of drama device, as a way of getting into improvisation, or getting quickly into a state, a kind of heightened emotional state, in order to give some energy to what I was doing. And so, in a way, it goes back to that. But this is what I'm getting to now is a more kind of thoughtful place. It's not a switched on energy thing. It's more a kind of thoughtful feeling place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the outcomes can be different. I mean, I just done a piece now, which was actually to do with a friend who'd retired, and they were going to have a party, a get together, a meal to celebrate it, and Jamie my wife was going to go, and I just had this feeling about retirement as being something like you've been growing a flower during all the 40 years this lady had been working, and that when you retired, the flower just kind of opened, and it was just this opening of the flower that suddenly seemed a really rich image to me. And I tried to do that. And I tried to do that just on the violin, but just an improvisation. It was less than a minute long. But in the end, I did about, I usually do half a dozen takes. I did, of it. But the first one was the one
Mm-hmm.
that I used. And it was because that just encapsulated that idea. The other
Mm-hmm.
ones were kind of more emotional, or maybe musically more interesting, or technically more interesting, whatever. But only the first one really just captured that idea as I had it and brought it out. But the others are all good bits of music. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
by the time I finished, by the time I got this flower opening here and this one opening there, and we join them all together, we'll have a whole kind of field of crocuses, coming up.
This concept of, say, like the first take
Yeah,
of an idea of a musical improvisation. I think it's very much like what I have experienced in the studio working with bands that were recording songs. What happens is, like, you play the same thing 3 times or 4 times, and
yeah,
the potential for free expression, let's say, for lack of a better term, kind of like gets compressed from take to take. So, like, even though you may have played less mistakes in take four, but it just doesn't sound as alive as the first take. So
no,
that's
no,
why generally I try to also kind of like have people just do an okay job on the first take,
yeah,
and maybe we can then decide to kind of like just do punch in to fix something, or but let's just keep the initial vibe. And
yeah,
um,
yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so often true, isn't it? Um, the first takes are the one that work. And I think you've got to think about the nature of mistakes as well. Really, I mean, I go backwards and forwards about mistakes.
yeah.
Sometimes I think, yeah, just leave everything in. It's an honest statement of what happened, and it's the good stuff wouldn't have happened without the bad stuff, in a way, and it's the most honest. Um, and then other times I think, oh well, I could just fix that. I could just put that bit in tune, or I could, you know, tighten up the rhythm a bit here, but usually I'm increasingly finding that becomes just laborious and often counterproductive, because I often find that there's something about the being slightly out of tune or the slightly out of time that actually gives it the whole thing its appeal anyway. And when you start tinkering with the reality of it, it
Yeah.
just loses too much. Yeah.
And again, that is a puzzle that I enjoy. Like sometimes I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to go in and fix something. I want to go in and create something around the mistake that makes the
Yes.
mistake work.
Oh, that's
So
a nice.
that's sort of like my
Yeah,
approach.
that's nice.
Also, when mixing the improvisations, right? Like I didn't cut anything out, but it was just more like, how do I balance the elements here in this moment, right?
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
how do I make it work?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I like that idea. I hadn't thought of that either.
And like in composition, it's the same for me, right? Like because like when I did the string quartet, for example, that the musical material was generated by an algorithm that I had created, right? So it was my composition already. But then, like I said, okay, no, I want to honor this material, so I really don't want to just change a note because it doesn't sound good to me. But I
Yes.
want to find an arrangement of these notes that then works, and that was the challenge, and that's why really a composition, at least a composition like that, is mostly problem solving
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and solving a puzzle. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of quite like puzzles. I mean, along with Tony 11, I was very into Sudoku puzzles. Can't even say the word puzzles. But I remember, I remember for a while when I started doing Sudoku puzzles, and I was working at the university in London. I was going in on the tube every day, and I was doing Sudoku puzzles. And I thought, well, actually, maybe I could catch up with my harmony. I've never been very good at harmony, so I started doing harmony exercises instead on the way in. Actually, I got more conversations out of doing harmony exercises than I ever did from Sudoku exercises. People who had done harmony, so many people actually, struggled with that in the past. I didn't get any better at it. I got kind of still, kept on making the same kind of mistakes, and I got bored with that in the end. I went back to Sudoku puzzles. But that to me is the nearest thing to kind of problem solving, is trying to do Bach harmony and get that sort of thing right.
But like the difference, at least, well, the difference is that with a Sudoku, you only have one. There's only one solution most of the time.
Yes.
There's just
Yes,
right, and
that's true. Yes, yeah.
that's the difference.
Yeah. Multiple solutions.
Yeah.
How are we doing then?
We're doing good. Doing very good. Hey, so you have just finished an album with your band, you said? Is that?
Yeah. I don't want to talk about it yet because I don't know what to say about it yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's we finished recording it a while ago, and basically what happened with it was that it was provisionally called In Transit, and it was supposed to be sort of describing a sort of a bit of a change of personnel and a change of material, and so that's why it kind of focused on the people. And then suddenly, when we did the music took over. That became more important. And then as we got to that point, I suddenly said, well, let's get the people back in it. And then I wanted to start finding some way of doing that. So we recorded a conversation between everybody in the band, and then we started cutting that up and trying to build that into kind of links and put that into some of the music as well. So that's where we are now, and it's I don't know what it's all about, but it's a kind of mixture of conversation and and songs and a little bit of Under Milkwood has come back and surfaced as well. So it's a funny mixture of things. So I haven't quite found a way of talking about the whole thing yet, but we're going to change the title as well. So
yeah. So are those like collective compositions or yours?
It's a mixture, actually. They're actually all DCB compositions. They're all band compositions, but from kind of different eras, sort of played through the voices of the people who are there now. So some kind of echoes of the past. Two of them are actually instrumentals that were on the album I did with David Jackson, Another Day, which was, and we've taken two of the songs there have turned into songs from instrumental pieces. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's certainly moved somewhere else from it's a place I've never been with the band before in terms of using the voices and using text within the songs. So we'll see.
Can you fill me in a little bit on the history of the David Cross Band? Like, when did you put out the first album under the name David Cross Band?
Well, I started. It kicked off. It's really the precursor was a sort of, it was a jazz. I was trying to learn to play jazz, and I was doing courses. I was playing with a bebop group. I had a residency with the bebop group, and I played with a group called Talisker, who were doing kind of jazz based on folk music, Scottish folk music and stuff like that. And I was teaching a bit of jazz, and I set up a jazz club. So John Etheridge used to come down and play, and he used to be local. And I was in that frame of mind. So I had a group called They Came From Plymouth, which was with Sheila Maloney, keyboard player, and bass and drums double. And it was started with an upright bass. So it was definitely a sort of jazz band. Anyway, I realised that I wanted to play more rock stuff. From doing that, I wanted it to be rockier. That wasn't really rocking my boat as much as I liked. So then I moved into having a rock band together. So I did an instrumental album first of all called Memos from Purgatory, which was and that was the first thing under my own name, which was David Cross. So albums have either come out as David Cross or the David Cross Band. But that was the first, the Memos from Purgatory. And then after that, we realised that we didn't have a guitar, and you had to have a guitar if you're going to be a rock band. So then we got a guitar in, and we've done a series of albums since then.
And that first album under your own name was which year approximately?
Memos from Purgatory must have been the 80s, I think. Memos from Purgatory, and then. I can't remember the first one we did with the band. Was it with the Big Picture? I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
I try not to think too much about.
Yeah, it was 89. Memos from.
Was it 89? It was
89.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, because so, I remember an album called Testing to Deconstruction.
Testing to Destruction.
Destruction. Yeah, that's the one that I got when I was like 20 or something.
Oh right. Well, thank you very much for buying it.
Yeah, sure. I loved it.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was good. That was one that was recorded. I think that was recorded. The one recorded down in Wimborne, I think, near where Robert used to live, in the studio down there. Yeah, it was interesting, and we did quite a lot of touring so we used to tour around clubs in Germany quite a lot. In the early days.
Has the lineup changed much since then, or do you still have guys in the band that were there with you 30 years ago?
Well, we have had the longest we had the same guitarist, Paul Clark, was there right the way through, and I think he was the longest serving member of the band. And Mick Paul, bass player, had been there for a long time as well.
Mhm.
Keyboard player changed, and drummers changed as well. I mean, I think when we worked with Craig Blundell was probably the most kind of focused, kind of rock-based version of the band that we've had. And then Pat Garvey after him, who we've worked with, has also been very good. So it became a kind of very much a guitar-based rock band. But now I've moved away from that. Moved away from guitar, so we haven't got a guitarist in this new band. Well, the singer plays guitar, but it's not a guitarist and that kind of way. And we're working with a new drummer as well. So it's all kind of changing in a way. It's kind of moving in something that has got a bit more to and fro in terms of colour. It's not sort of so one-dimensional. So we've lost a certain amount of authority and certainty about what's going on, and gone into a kind of more quantum state of nobody quite knows what it's supposed to sound like at any one point. So it's actually quite a place which I quite like to be in. It was very nice, and I really liked working with the David Cross band as a kind of strong rock band to play with. But I kind of also quite like being in this place where you never quite know what's going to happen next. And I like it's the whole idea of knowing what something should sound like, which has always seemed like the kind of kiss of death to me. If you know what something is going to sound like, what's the point of doing it? It used to be a constant problem going to studios where the engineer would also say, well, what do you want it to sound like? As if I bloody knew that, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be asking you to do anything, would I? There's no point, if what it sound like U2, they get U2 to play it. And, the DCB had got a bit kind of into its own formula, I think. So for this album in particular, I just wanted to move away from that and just try and see where else we could go with it. Which was partly why I wanted to look at some of the older material as well, to prove how the people can really change it. But the thing I really learned is, as we said earlier on, the music is stronger than the people. So, as always, completely lost, completely ignorant about why any of it works. So.
But speaking of guitar-based sounds, like when you and I, when we played together, and like this disc 5 of the Pan America box set that I put together, which just has the two of us playing, like when I listen to it, like sometimes I have no idea, is that you playing the lead solo, or is it Marcus? Is it me?
I never know.
So you found a way to probably by having worked with the rock guitarist in your band for a long time to kind of like counter that energy with your and even in Crimson you did but with the technology back then it was probably a little harder.
Yeah, fuzz boxes were a good invention, weren't they? I mean, they worked. They worked on Hohner pianettes as well as, as well as guitars.
And did you just because I'm just curious, like so with Crimson, did you have like lots of feedback issues on stage, or how did you solve that?
Yeah, initially I started off stuffing a violin with fiberglass stuff to try and cut down the vibrations. But there was, I think it was the Barkus Berry pickup was the first one that seemed to kind of get through, solve a lot of those problems. But I think still all the time I was in Crimson, I was using basically a violin with a pickup on it, a Barker-Sperry pickup, yeah, all the way through. So I didn't get hold of a decent electric violin until after that.
Mm-hmm.
There was one that there was a Fender I remember that was that I did try out, which I didn't like, but I'd quite like to go back and try it now. It was, it was a bit too harsh then, but I think if rather than sort of reacting like a bloody violinist to it, saying no, this doesn't sound very nice, sounds nasty. I think if I'd gone with it, I might have got further on earlier, because
Mm-hmm.
I think the sound system was different. It was a different. I don't think they were magnetic pickups, but certainly a different kind of pickup system. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that might have given me, because it had a good signal, that might have given me better results. So, you know, I mean, I'm still, you know, go backwards and forwards all the time now. I've got a V Electra, which has been very good, but you know, compared with the Zeta, it's got, you know, too much bow noise on the E string, and I'm trying to work out how to cut down on to change the you know, EQ envelope as I move across the strings. You know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to see if there's a way of doing that so that I can cut down on the bow noise there, but still get the warmth at the bottom. You know, it's a tricky thing, but you know, I still love playing the instrument. You know, I just love it. You know, I practice. I find I move between two things. I've been trying to balance out practicing, which I see as a kind of technique process, one that I enjoy, with trying to improve my sound, my electric sound, which is a kind of another process. And they don't quite meet. You know, if I work on one, it's always at the expense of the other somehow. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, they meet when I perform or when I play or when I record. That's all. That's so far. You know, it seems to have been working all right, but not as practice processes. They don't meet up. You know, I have to do one thing or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's all a bit weird. I've got a new toy, a V Sound 2, which is a Stradivarius in a box. That's my new effect pedal.
Okay, Stradivarius in the
You
box.
come
Nice.
across those shit.
Oh.
Impulse responses. It's an impulse response thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they take a Stradivarius and they drop a hammer onto the bridge
Mm-hmm.
and record the response, and then turn that into an EQ, which they sell to you in a pedal. Well, it's not just Stradivarius, it's Stradivarius Guarnarius, and then there's cellos as well. So I've got actually the cello sounds really works really well with the V Electra. It's great. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
drop it down an octave and I use the cello sound with that. It's really classy. It's really good. But the Stradivarius is very interesting because it just changes. It does change the way that you play. You know, it's like playing with a violin again, but quite good. It is like playing with quite a good violin, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually, you know, changes the attack. And when you have that kind of snappy attack on it, which good violin players do, it responds. You know, it likes that. It likes you doing that. But you know, I can't play with it all the time. It's a special effect because it just forces you to want to play Bach all the time. You know, it just got
Yeah, yeah.
it's just screaming out for what should be coming out there. So I kind of go back to much more kind of even bass. I have a bypass thing that cuts out a lot of the bow sound, and I'm using that for my basic sound at the moment. But
And
no, it's all good fun.
David, when did the fretted instrument come into your life?
It took a while, I think, because I was when I first had Zetas, no, they weren't fretted. It took a while because there's a lot of resistance to it. I wasn't sure whether it would work or not,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just just ongoing problems with the tuning. It was just driving me mad. Just the difficulty of the difficulty of the normal technical difficulty that people have playing the violin in tune, which I had as well, but I probably had it worse than other people. because I become nervous about it, so I become uptight about it, so it became an issue, and it became an issue in live performance because I was worried about it. So I would be concerned, and therefore I wouldn't relax, and therefore I'd play sharp or flat or whatever. So in the end, I decided just to give it a try with frets, and it worked basically. You know, instantly when I tried, originally did fretting just up to the fifth, 7 frets, I think it is, isn't it? And that really worked well for me, even though those frets they're never perfect. You know, they're never in exactly the right place to actually make a rising tune. There's always you can always play them sharp or flat. But it just gave me enough security. So it was a kind of psychological switch. It just said, you don't have to worry about this anymore, right? You put your finger there, right? You're close enough. You know, play that note. You'll be all right. You know, you can move it up or down a bit if you want to, but just put your finger there and you'll be okay. And it's just like a psychological crutch, really, and it worked. And just from that point, I just started relaxing about tuning, and you know, it was just such an enormous release, I suppose, a relief, and I got over the tension and a release of anxiety. That release from anxiety, that I could just start concentrating on something else when I first walked in front of an audience, rather than playing the first notes in tune, you know. And so it was liberating, absolutely liberating. So I tried going the whole hog. I had a wood violin that was fretted all the way up, but you know, at the top the frets are so small, close together, you can't get your fingers into them. But it was very well done. It was a nice instrument. It is a nice instrument. I still have it here. But in the end, I kind of compromised. I still like being able to swoop around fairly freely, so I did it up to halfway. So now I have halfway fretted instrument, and it kind of works. I mean, I certainly play more in tune, I think, than I would without frets now. Still, I think. But you know, it does. You know, it's not a perfect solution. You know, double stops are always going to be a problem on a violin anyway. So playing those in tune is sometimes easier. It depends. You know, I have to be very careful about how I tune the violin. I have to tune it very carefully and make sure I tune to these non-perfect fifths that we're also keen on. And then it kind of works all right. But I've had David Bruce Johnson, who makes the Violectras, work very hard on getting the frets as close as we could to good intonation with me. So we keep trying.
Yeah, it's the world of guitars has had that issue kind of like forever, and there are solutions nowadays, but I kind of like that. I like that a guitar is never really in tune. It's like there's a certain magic to the fact that you're always gonna get slightly differently interacting over tones, and especially playing with distortion. Yeah, if you wanted to sound always the same, or then it would make sense to have a perfect tuning. But to me, really, I love the fact that things are organic. It's
yes.
I mean, yeah, you want it to be somewhat in tune for sure, but yeah. I mean, especially if you start playing chords, if you start playing more than a double stop,
that's what would terrify me all the time.
But then
because they sound so awful when they're out of tune, don't they?
But you can get just beautiful chorusing, if it's just within reason, it sounds good,
Yeah.
No, I didn't know. I had no idea really when you started the solo career, and and yeah, also about your anxiety, you know, playing a tune. I
All right.
never thought about that, but it makes total sense. I guess I would have been pretty anxious about that as well.
Yes. Yeah. 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 It was definitely getting in the way because it was interfering with my relationship with the audience. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
not just 'cause, I might have been playing out of tune, but just because I wasn't relaxed. I wasn't really working with the audience and picking stuff up from them.
So
There's
has your
plenty of
interest
other things
in
wrong with my technique. I think don't need to
yeah.
worry about tuning.
So has your interest in jazz dwindled, or is that something that has still with you, kind of like also as a player?
In a way, it ran its course, I think, and that I kind of learned what I needed to learn.
Hmm.
Um, it's difficult to describe. I found it difficult to express exactly what I feel without sounding very negative about jazz, and I don't actually feel negative about jazz. I think jazz, is probably the most innovative um, form of music that's happened in the last couple of hundred years, and I think it's immensely powerful, and I think all the players that have made it work, have done are incredible artists, and in that way, I remain kind of in awe of jazz music and jazz musicians. I think that what I found in the process of learning was that, um, like learning any language, that it's a very specific language, that it's very self-referential, like all forms of music, um, and that the starting point was always what had gone before, never starting somewhere that was actually a different place altogether. I couldn't get that to work anyway. I couldn't get that to work um, within that formula. And for me, I found that I wasn't able to transcend the forms. I
Hmm.
found that I wasn't able to really express myself um, within the forms, within jazz forms. I found that I found the audience for jazz responding, doing a really big job of conditioning. They were just responding to the jazz references. They weren't responding to the person or the people that were in front of them, as far as I could see. They didn't seem to respond to the innovations or the realities, both emotional um, and musical, that were going on in front of them. And I couldn't. I knew I was never comfortable. I was never
Hmm.
comfortable because it never felt a place. It didn't feel like, as I said, I'm walking onto the stage with Stickman. I feel like I'm walking into a familiar living room. Walking onto a jazz stage, initially I was a pretender, or an imposter, and all these things, but that's part of learning. But later on, I just was not comfortable to be me there. I was able to play the role of the jazz player, if you want, to a certain extent. But I wasn't happy with that role. I didn't like that role. I didn't want to be that person doing that.
Hmm.
So even when the imposter turned into, I had a certain degree of competence. I wasn't happy with being a competent imposter. still felt it wasn't home,
Hmm.
which was a shame because I did. I did really like, a lot of jazz that had gone before, and like Miles Davis and Coltrane and people. And I liked a lot of things like into jazz fusions. I liked a lot of the kind of crossover stuff, but he's never really able to be comfortable there. Whereas I was more comfortable with punk. Really, it was more kind of understandable to me. I could read that. I could see the people. I could feel the feelings. But I don't know. You'd sit in an audience at a jazz concert, and everybody be clapping these solos, and you think, well, there's nothing there. Nothing happened. What are we clapping? Nothing happened at all. I couldn't get into it. I couldn't buy into that.
If we want to just look at this from a positive side, right? I really, I really believe that you are a musician with, first of all, you come from a certain culture, right? And like the European culture of whatever your influences, and you also have a vision, like you have musical ideas. Let's not call it vision, right? But like you have musical ideas, and you are an artist. You have artistic ideas, and that's probably why the concept of sort of like recreating a sound was like a big part of what jazz. I don't think that that's jazz, but for a lot of people, that's what jazz is. Recreating a sound is probably not of a big interest to you. Absolutely the same with me. And like I wasn't really that aware of jazz in it, like more in general and also in historic terms. But I remember that in my early 20s, I started late. I really only started with 20 to play, and I had a friend, or I still have this friend, and he said to me that he had studied jazz for a few years, and he said it was the biggest mistake he made in his life. That's what he said to me, and that was kind of like stayed with me. And now I think I understand what he meant. But I think it's really about like first of all, what do you want to do? Like, what would David do? Like this idea of your own toolkit, your own toolbox, your own ways of expression. And if studying jazz, or if actually playing with the jazz group adds more tools to the toolkit, then that's fine, right? But then you still want to design your own sound and your own piece of music, right?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly did learn a lot. I did add a lot of tools to my toolkit from studying jazz, and I mean the conversations that jazz pitched instrument players have, or particularly chordal players, just soul destroying, just totally focused on chord types all the time, and chord scales and all the rest of it. It's just exhausting. And it does, it's very, I suppose, I mean, the whole chord thing is just kind of, it just eliminates any other way, of looking at the pool of notes, or the pool of sound that's available. If you're thinking in terms of how everything relates to the major scale all the time, everything is a function of the major scale. There's more noise in the universe than that.
This is another thing that I do try to teach, is that when we say, for example, C, E, and G, that does not mean that you have to label it as a C major chord. You could also just simply say this is 3 notes, and one is a C, the other is an E, and it's a G. You don't have to label. And you can sort of kind of like decide if you see something just simply as a collection that you don't label, collection of pitches you don't label, or if you want to label it. And I think like the tendency to label things that
Yeah.
is like when the restriction happens, right? You can
Yeah.
still be aware of the notes that you play and of their functions, right? But you kind of like decide which level of determination, in a way, of the system you submit yourself under.
Yeah.
And yet, that's also why I'm starting with the circle of fifth, because then it's just a collection of pitches, and you can kind of like combine any of these pitches. You don't have to label them.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I understand why there's a joy in having a system that explains everything, and certainly if you understand chords very well, you can interpret almost anything in terms of those chords. But there are things I've learned from Andrew Keeling, flute player and
Mm-hmm.
musicologist, composer, and I've have another album with him. Finished another album with him this year, which is going to be out
Nice.
later this year. And one of the things that I've really learned from him is about ambiguity in music and tonality, and it's beautiful, when you don't know whether you're in a major or minor, when these chords might resolve or they might never intended to resolve. All of that is just wonderful stuff, and you can create it, of course, ambiguity just with a couple of notes, or even one note, and add another one to it. And, the simplest things are wonderful, and to just suddenly, like you saying, if you've got C and G, well, I mean, just having a C would be enough for everybody to say it's C major, in a jazz context. It's just, must be. That's it. It's just. So I understand why it's nice to be able to explain everything, but musically, it's nice, really, not to be able to explain or even to anticipate exactly what's going to happen as a result of the notes that happen to have occurred in front of you at any particular moment. It's much more exciting to see that there are different relationships that can evolve, and different ways of playing. So anyway, I've learned. I love the power of ambiguity now. That's my latest.
Yes.
Minimalism in terms of resources and ambiguity.
You just brought up the word simple, and this is like something that, like, even like from my early youth, I did not understand what people meant and when they were saying that a piece of music is simple, for example, because that never meant anything to me. Like, where goes something from simple, and when goes something from simple to complicated or difficult, or, well, complicated, I guess. To me, that doesn't make any sense. I think music is like David, you can play one note that is so incredibly rich and beautiful, and that, like, it kind of like includes the whole world somehow, that one note. And then somebody comes around and says, oh, that's very simple, like he's just playing one note. And I talked about this with Nick Berch, also as part of this series of conversations, and he said there's I can't remember, like he said, as he said, there is something like simple-minded.
Yes.
There's simple-minded and there's simple, and that it's something. It's not the same thing, but I can't remember what he said. But anyway, it's so so it seems to me like you're still very active, like with at least like 3 projects in the works, as far as I.
Oh yeah. It's very active. Yeah. No, we've got another one. Yeah, I've got all sorts of things going on. And some quite bad failures, really. I have this idea for an album based on quantum, on the kind of on quantum mechanics and the
Yeah.
strange concepts that come up with that, and trying to get people to express this as music. And so I sort of planned out what ideas I might try and get other people to work on, and I did talk to another composer friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, that sounds right up my street." And I sent him up my sort of sheet outlining all the things, and he hasn't spoken to me since. So I've got, I'm so sure he would think this was great, but he definitely doesn't seem to want to go forwards with it. So I'm not sure, I'm not sure how far I'm going to get with that. But that was one idea I've been working on all kind of. I tend to keep a number of ideas on the boil, and that's one that kind of has been coming back to me a bit. So, but
Can you
the first positive step I took on it just got knocked back. So,
but can you give me a little bit more detail on what you had in mind with that?
all I wanted to do is just explore just explore. I just wanted to see if music could shed any light on, for instance, when we were talking earlier, we were talking about playing something that might be construed as a mistake, and then I said, well, maybe if you played it 4.5 seconds later, it would make that first occurrence justified. So, in on the quantum level, there seems to be no reason in physics why something shouldn't go backwards in time or forwards in time. There doesn't seem to be any difference. So, in that way, perhaps music also demonstrates that, that this has a meaning which is not apparent at this point, but it becomes apparent later on. So, but it's only when that decision is made later on. If a different decision is made later on, then this has a different meaning, doesn't it? So you could explore that in music. So you said, so I haven't got a piano, but you could start off with a collision of two notes, and you could have and the meaning, you have meaning one come out of that, and then then you try a different experiment where you have the collision of two notes, and then a different meaning is attached to it depending on what's played later afterwards. So it's a kind of time travel changing of meaning. It's just music is a way of exploring it, as as is mathematics and language. I think probably what put him off was I wrote a kind of sketch about Schrodinger's cat, which which had a song, dead or alive, nobody knows when he's dead, or something like that. Some stupid song that I put in it, along with some sort of improvisation, and that came on and off, and the kind of guy that was singing just sort of stomped off stage at the end. This was just a sort of humorous attempt to outline what possibly could be done with the idea.
What comes to mind?
Sorry.
What comes to mind for me is this idea in quantum physics that the observer, or the presence of the observer, changes the music or changes the situation. And
yes, that would be a very good thing to explore, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And that is sort of like, that has always been true throughout my life, that when like listening to a piece of music on your own versus with person X or person Y around, the piece of music would change. Like the way that I experience it would change. And that seems to be kind of like, well, at least in principle, related,
Why did you say earlier that you don't take any notice of the audience? Is that true? Is it that you don't take any notice? Did you say something like that earlier?
No, I said that I'm sort of like, when it comes to my musical interest to explore, I don't think that the audience doesn't want to experience that. I try to keep this positive outlook that the audience wants to actually experience that, somehow. That's sort of like how I kind of like maybe trick myself into the situation where like we can be explorers rather than repeating things. And like there's like, I have to be so grateful having met Pat and Tony, because like, yeah, like to be quite honest, like the reason why um, I was able to tour with Stickman, or you and we were able to tour with Stickman, was because Tony is kind of famous, right?
Yes,
But
yes,
Tony has been on stages for 60 years,
yes,
and you know, people come because they like his look sometimes, even,
yes,
or you know, and they don't really expect necessarily a specific kind of music,
yeah,
and because of Tony's broad background as well. So I think that's just such a wonderful thing, and it's a real privilege. I would say it's a real privilege even to be in that
yes,
situation.
yeah. No, it absolutely is. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think. I mean, I kind of grew up with my father was was a musician, and he played. He was a church organist and choir master, and he was a dance band pianist, and this was all semi-pro stuff. And then
Mhm.
later on, he also did used to do play in like working men's clubs where he'd be playing the organ. So he would play organ. But one of the things that he was very, very good at putting together medleys, say Beatles tunes or well-known tunes, and just the segues from one to the other were always very smooth. And he was always very good at judging the mood of the room, And I'd watch. I always felt that what he had was something very special, and that he seemed to pick up the vibe of the room, when he was working. And then when we talked about it, he did. He was also a good improviser because the organ was about the only thing you had to improvise on, because you have to improvise for people walking into church and
Mhm.
processions in church. So you have to be able to stop and start according to when they reach a certain point in the church. Um, but I also, a lot of drummers also watch people's feet, to see whether their feet are tapping, to see
Mhm.
whether they're actually feeling what's going on, and they kind of change their feel to try and get that tapping going. And I kind of, I try, I feel when I get into the space where we're improvising, that we're kind of collectively meeting up with the audience, in a different play, in a different space. That we're kind
Mhm.
of, but we're all still there, but we're not, the people up front, moving our arms around or whatever. It's more like, we're all in the dance together. You talked about it as being a dance earlier. I think it is like a dance. So I think it has a physicality to it, and I feel like we're all kind of in this different space together, and that somehow there is a communication going on, and that I think we do sense things from the audience, um, through somehow other means, telepathically or from the scent in the room. Goodness knows how we do it, but there's definitely something that's going on that's extraordinary when people come together.
Mhm.
Um, and exploring that space is just, uh, you know, it's just such a dream of an experience. But it is very different doing it with people, like Stickman, and it's just because you don't have to fight with any of the other problems. You don't have to, argue about what tunes you're playing, or you don't have to sort of put up with tunes that are uninteresting, while you wait for a chance to improvise or do your solo or whatever.
Like Pat also watches the audience quite a bit, like for
Yes,
like the
yes,
body movement and
yes,
and I think there is an element that we should not forget, which in the case of Stickman it was Robert Fraser,
yes.
who is the sound engineer, who is in the audience,
Actually, in the audience, yeah,
and so he can kind of like make sure as much as he can that the energy transfers, right?
yeah,
And he can watch the room and kind of like ride the waves of the music, like with the faders,
yes,
and that's you know
yeah,
that's why I think like a great band always needs their own engineer. Like
Yes.
I'm scared of going around playing with a band without and having an
Yeah.
engineer
Yeah.
going with.
But it's amazing how good people are, actually. There are a lot of really good people out there,
Yeah.
do things. But I think that's the ideal, yeah, it's the ideal situation.
I mean, if you're thinking about improvised music, that you really need an
Yeah,
engineer who's really good at understanding what's going on.
yeah, yeah. Because otherwise, it could take 3 nights to work out
Yeah,
what's happening, isn't it? What's important.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, David. I really don't want to take up too much of your time. I think it's
How are
for
we
me
doing?
it's we're doing good. I mean,
Okay.
like almost 2 hours. So,
Yes.
but I
Well,
think you have so many. Yes, you have so many things to share, and I have the feeling that sometimes you're holding back a little bit because like I think there's more in your sphere of experience that is some things you don't share much. Like, uh, and I maybe I'm wrong, but at least that's
well,
kind of like
something,
the impression I get.
what occurs to you? What I don't know that I'm particularly aware of that. I
Just
don't want to. Yeah.
for example, like your work, like the teaching you did, and like I
Right.
would be like really interested in kind of like having some sort of sense what, like you said, you were there like for 40 years or something, or 30 years, and
Mm.
and I'm always interested in these long-term experiences, these long-term projects, like when you started, like the first 6 months, like the first 10 years, and like how things kind of revolve, how things change, how one's personal, uh, let's just say, skill level of dealing with the situation of being a teacher or being in an institution, or like all of these things I'm always very interested about, because I don't have that experience as a totally freelance uh, person, so.
Yes. Well, I had a kind of upside down experience really as a teacher because because I trained as a teacher and then I became a musician.
Mhm.
Um, and then after being a musician, I then looked into, I'd been interested in drama before, so then I started studying acting as
Mhm.
well. And I got some work as an actor as well, so I did some acting. Um, and I did that until really I kind of realized that it was just as difficult as making music. And at that point, I thought, wow, well, maybe this could get quite hard work. I think I thought it was just having a laugh. I thought it was just having fun, and um, I didn't realize quite how difficult it was. And then I started it because I was lucky to do understudying on some productions with some really good actors in, and I could start to see what they were actually doing, and
Mhm.
and how wonderful they actually were. I actually did a I can't remember, did I tell you this before I did it? I was understudy with do you know Helen Mirren, an actress?
Yes.
Maybe, yeah. Well, she was the lead in this play, and I was just I was understudying the male lead, so he couldn't make the tech rehearsal, so I had to do the tech rehearsal with Helen Mirren as the main actress. So it was really that was a great experience just to you're just talking through the lines. You just talk through the lines, and it's just to get the lights in the right place, and all the rest of it. But just in the rehearsals to see her working and everything was fantastic because she was always different. I mean, that's what really started me thinking. That there was never it wasn't just that every night was different. It was kind of from moment to moment she was
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
That she was always just moving. There was something always going on there, and it was always just seemed really kind of real. So I began to sort of get a sense of what really classy classy actors could do. And when I got to that stage, I thought, well, maybe I better get my violin out again, because I thought, I thought I had acting cracked. I thought I'd have it done in 2 years. But and actually, I think by the time it took me, they had this thing about getting an equity card, where you couldn't get an equity card without having an equity job, and you couldn't get an equity job without having an equity card. It's the actors' union, so you couldn't. It wasn't possible theoretically to get an equity card. Yet people had them. So I finally managed to do it because I was working in a theatre in Bristol Old Vic Theatre, where I'd written the music for a play, and because I was interested in acting, they let me act act in one of the scenes. I had to just dance around on stage doing a Morris dance, just hitting other people with poles and things. They let me do a bit of that, and somebody there who was going to be the musical director on another show saw me doing that, assumed I had an equity card because I was in an equity theatre, but I was actually there as a musician on a musicians union card, and I got offered the other job. So when I took it, they said, "What's your equity number?" I said, "Oh, I haven't got an equity card." And they said, "Oh, well, you've got an equity job now, so we'll have to get you an equity card." So I got one. So that's how you did it. So I finally had a card.
Hey,
You asked me about teaching, actually, didn't you? I've been talking about.
no. Did you remember or where your passion for theater or acting originates?
No, I don't. Just from fun,
Like did
family play, just playing. I think it just comes from being a child.
so it wasn't like going to the theater as a kid or maybe seeing like a film on TV or something that kind of like spoke to you.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Lawrence
Mhm.
of Arabia was my favourite film as I was growing up, and that I loved the music from that.
Mhm.
But I also, also loved the imagery and and the acting, and everything was wonderful about it to me. It was
Mhm.
just fantastic.
Mhm.
My father was, he was a musician. He talked about, his mother. I think his grandmother had been an actress. I think there was that sort of side in the family, so people would talk about it a bit. Loved comedy. Always loved things that made me laugh. Um, I don't know. No,
Mhm.
I think it was also. I think it was to do with being very shy, and it seemed a way of getting out of that shyness. I didn't understand that. Actually, you can still be shy and you can act, and then you can still be shy again afterwards, or even while you're doing it.
Mhm. Mhm.
It doesn't solve those problems. So I don't really know where it came from. No, it's kind of a genetic need to show off, I suppose. In a way, it's a kind of. But I don't know. I don't know. But it was that I had a lot of fun with learning to act really, and doing it a bit. I got to do some interesting things, but they were all theatre, and actually that was rather nice, I think. Um, but I got into teaching after that. But when I did get into teaching, I got into teaching because of music, because I'd written some music for a show, and then they couldn't play it because they couldn't read music, so they asked me. I had to come and teach them to play the music I'd written. So that's how I started teaching.
Mhm.
And I worked in something called community education, which was a kind of experimental thing that had been set up in London, um, which was just to try and explore other ways of uh, lifelong learning. And it didn't rule out school age at all, but it included the whole range of life. So we had things set up for babies, really babies, mums and babies, dads and babies, and an old people's choir, and um, and I did great stuff. I really enjoyed stuff doing that. I had a chamber music group. Basically, anything I wanted to learn about that anybody else wanted to learn about, I just set up a class and we'd do it. So we did chamber music Thursday afternoons. Jazz was kind of Tuesdays and Thursday evenings, I think. Oh no, Tuesday evenings was jazz. Thursday evening we had band night and rehearsals and shows and things like that. But it was just working in the community, just making things happen. And a lot of that was
Hmm.
based around theatre anyway. We put on
Hmm.
shows and stuff like that. And then I got into, but I had been trained as a proper teacher before that. And then eventually I got a job as a proper teacher when that fell through.
Hmm.
And that was when the hard work really began, because then it became much more difficult. But what I had learnt from community education really was where I did get some insight into education. And I learned so many things, really. I mean, I suppose one of the main things was that people respond very well to each other across the whole age group. But when you have a whole age group kind of vertically, kind of grandparents, parents, children, um, there isn't any problem with discipline. There isn't any problem with kind of vying for resources or anything. All those problems don't exist, and
Hmm.
there's much more. It's much easier. People behave much better, and people want to learn and learn from each other in a much better way. So that kind of natural order, of natural location for learning, which is kind of a family
Hmm.
learning situation or a small community learning situation, is really effective. And
Hmm.
that was kind of the first thing that really came home to me, that it was possible to do that. And very different from going to schools, which are all layered. They're all layered with age groups, and the whole education system's layered in age groups. But learning doesn't necessarily work that way, and people
Hmm.
respond to different age group. People respond to other people from different age groups in different ways. So, um,
This is
where somebody might not
super
respond to a teacher.
interesting, super interesting for me, David, because I have found that in my life, I've always looked for inspiration, let's say, or learning experiences
Mm,
from people that are older than me or younger than me, and I still do.
yeah,
I never thought about it really, but
yeah. It's natural, I think. I think it's
hmm.
natural
Hmm.
because you recognize the difference
Hmm.
in doing that. Um,
Yeah, that's why I really do have a whole lot of, I don't want to say respect, but like if I ask you a question, right? Like it is because I see value in your answer, even without like knowing what the answer will be, right? It's
yeah,
but it's sort of like the basis of my uh, communication with the world, that I
yeah,
sort of like do believe that there is something there in other people that
yeah,
can be useful for me in a way.
yes. I mean, I was always learning all the time when I was in community education. I used to do this chamber music class, and um, in which I was the teacher. But I mean, I also went, not in my institution, went to another institution where I was a pupil in a chamber music class with other people who were much better than me. So I was always learning anyway. But I remember there was somebody called George. I remember was a good deal older than me when I was in my 30s. He was in his 80s, who came along. He was a viola player, and um, he would play in this group, and he kind of, because he became a kind of father figure to me, and I knew he had something for me. I
Hmm.
just knew. almost from the time he walked through the door, I knew he had something that I wanted. And you know, and we did have a nice time. He introduced me to golf. He's the first person. We went to some nets, and he showed me how to thing. And then we did a bit of pitch and putt. You know, we'd meet up and do some of that. And he, you know, he'd organised for us to go out as a quartet and play at somebody's party, and there's some friends of his. And it was just a really nice relationship. And I remember that one day he came in and he brought in some stuff to clean one. He said, "I'll clean your violin today." And he took after the session. It took ages, you know, to clean the violin. And he had this special polish he was using on this violin and things. And he died 2 days later. You know, he was gone. It was like he knew. It was it was a, you know, it wasn't he wasn't ill at all. It was just a bleed in his leg, and he, you know, just it didn't get caught, and he just bled out from his thing. But that was the last thing he did. He'd never done that before. He just came in and he just, "Today I'm going to clean your violin," you know, and he just did this thing for me, and it was just a lovely thing to do. And he, you know, just the way he talked to me he gave me great hope about old age, which I had not had before. I think that was probably the biggest gift he gave me. You know, he always had a twinkle in his eye. You know, and he just loved people, and he just, you know, he fired me up with some enthusiasm for old age. It was, it was really a lovely thing to have from him. And you know, I just had lots of really nice experiences like that. So when I went into mainstream education, it was completely the opposite. And everything about it was wrong as far as I could see. You know, the first thing I said when I went in there was, well, you know, people were so proud. Unfortunately, people were so proud in the English education system. Musicians were so proud that we got music into the national curriculum. You know, it was, rather than being a sort of a fringe subject, it was put into the national curriculum. So, so after, you know, a term of doing this, I realised what a terrible mistake that was, because these kids at the age of 14 had to be there. They didn't want to be there, you know, and they were being tortured into learning music. So I said, well, we should make it voluntary. It'll make all the difference in the world. Just make it something they can do or they cannot do. If they don't want to do it, fine. You know, but if they want to do it, then let's make it fun. But, you know, having to keep them there, you know, it's just not. Well, anyway, I think that's a whole other story from.
Yes.
From that way on.
Yeah, David. Maybe we'll leave it at that. We don't want to go on for another 2 hours, which I know we could, but yeah, it was just wonderful to talk with you again.
Yeah, Andrew.
Yes,
no, it's nice. It's good to learn something more about each other as well.
Yes.
But it's funny, you know, when you play together, you do develop an intense insight, actually, don't you, into other people? Yeah. So, you know, we actually do know each other very well.
Yeah, it's a sort of level where that is it's very difficult to verbalize.
Yes.
Right. It's like sort of like the intuitive knowledge about each other. And, yes. Yeah. You know.
Really extraordinary.
And I will never forget the Bolivia experience. That really was like, you know, in all regards, it was. It was pretty special.
It was, yes. I agree, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, it was the only ever sound check where I was sitting on a stool to play.
It was absolutely the whole, you know, altitude sickness thing. I was really horrible. I just that not being able to sleep was the thing that really horrible for me. I just, you know, every time I started to slip off, you know, I'd be awake like that, you know, because I thought because my body thought I was dying.
Yes.
Yeah. Enough oxygen. I wish I'd known about the oxygen cylinder straight away. I think that would have that kind of sorted me out.
Yeah.
but yeah, on every level, it was fantastic. Yeah, I agree. That was one of the best times of my life. Yeah, it was really good. All
Good,
right.
David. Say hi to
Right.
Jamie, please.
Sorry?
Yeah. Say hi to Jamie, please.
Yeah, will do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Bye bye for now. I
Bye.
talk to you soon. Bye bye.